I did not call you because you were strong. I did not choose you because you understood everything. I called you because you were willing to follow, even when the path was unclear. When I first saw you, I saw more than what others noticed. I saw your questions. I saw your fears. I saw your longing for something truer than what the world was offering you. You did not come to me with certainty. You came with openness. That was enough. Many heard my words and walked away, not because the words were harsh, but because they required change. Following me has never been about admiration from a distance. It has always been about walking close enough to be changed. I asked you to leave familiar things behind, not because those things were evil, but because they could not give you life. Boats, nets, tables, coins, reputations. They were safe, predictable, and limiting. I invited you into something wider, deeper, and truer. You did not always understand where I was leading you. There were moments when you were afraid to ask. Moments when you doubted silently. Moments when you followed simply because you had already taken the first step. I saw all of it, and I did not turn you away. Walking with me means learning slowly. I do not rush your growth. I teach you as you are able to receive. Some truths come like seed. They rest in you before you understand them. Others come like light, sudden, clear, and undeniable. I speak to you in stories because your heart remembers stories. Truth carried in story finds its way into places arguments cannot reach. When I speak of fields, birds, lamps, bread, and water, I am teaching you about the kingdom through what you already know, so that what you do not yet know will not frighten you. You will notice that I often ask questions, not because I lack answers, but because I want you to see what is already forming within you. Following me is not about repeating my words. It is about letting those words shape your choices. There will be days when you feel close to me. There will be days when you feel confused by me. There will even be days when you are disappointed. Do not fear those moments. They are part of learning to trust something greater than certainty. I am patient with your failures. I know how quickly fear speaks when pressure comes. I know how easily you promise courage before the test arrives. When you fall, I do not discard you. I teach you what love looks like when strength runs out. I did not gather you to build status. I gathered you to learn how to love, not with words alone, but with action, sacrifice, and truth. The world will know you by how you love, not by how loudly you speak. As you walk with me, you will learn that the kingdom is not something you conquer. It is something you receive. It grows quietly within you, reshaping how you see others, how you see yourself, and how you trust God. You are not following perfectly. You are following honestly. That is why I called you. When the time came for you to go out, I did not give you wealth. I did not give you extra clothing. I did not give you protection the way the world understands protection. I gave you authority, and I gave you trust. You remember how surprised you were. You expected preparation to look different. You thought readiness meant having enough in your hands. But I wanted you to learn that what you carry inside you matters more than what you carry with you. I sent you out in pairs so you would not walk alone. Not because you were weak, but because love is learned in companionship. You would learn patience with one another. You would learn forgiveness quickly. You would learn that the message is not carried by one voice, but by shared obedience. I told you not to worry about where you would stay. Peace would guide you. Where peace was welcomed, you were to remain. Where it was rejected, you were not to argue or defend yourselves. You were to move on, leaving judgment to God. This was difficult for you. You wanted to be accepted everywhere. You wanted to be heard. But I was teaching you that rejection does not mean failure. Some hearts are not ready, and forcing truth into closed hands only hardens them. I warned you that following me would not make you safe in the way the world defines safety. You would be misunderstood. You would be opposed. Some would speak against you not because you were wrong, but because truth unsettles what people wish to protect. I told you not to fear those who can harm the body. Fear has a way of shrinking your vision. It makes you forget who holds your life. I reminded you that nothing spoken in secret remains hidden forever. Truth will surface. Faithfulness will be seen. I spoke to you about sparrows, small creatures easily overlooked. If God does not forget them, how much more does He see you? You are not unnoticed. You are not expendable. Even when you feel exposed, you are held. I asked you to acknowledge me openly, not as a test of loyalty, but because love cannot remain hidden forever. What you truly trust will eventually shape your actions. Following me quietly is sometimes wise, but denying truth to protect comfort slowly erodes the heart. I also told you something hard to hear, that I did not come to bring peace that avoids truth. My words would divide households, not because love fails, but because truth demands a choice. Light reveals what darkness prefers to hide. Still, I assured you that you were not alone. When you would stand before authorities, when words would feel distant, the Spirit would speak through you. You were never meant to defend yourselves by strength alone. I sent you out not as conquerors, but as witnesses, not to dominate, but to heal, to proclaim, and to love without control. You went out with little, but you returned with understanding. You learned that obedience is not about certainty. It is about trust. And you are still learning. I looked at you as you stood before me, and I did not see what the world measures. I did not weigh you by success or strength. I saw your hunger, your weariness, your longing for something that lasts. And I called you blessed. This surprised you. You expected blessing to sound like reward. You thought it would follow achievement. But the kingdom does not speak the language of pride. It speaks to the open places in the heart. I said the poor are blessed, not because lack is good, but because need creates space. Those who know they need help are closer to receiving it. Those who trust their own fullness often close their hands without realizing it. I said those who hunger now are blessed. Hunger sharpens attention. It teaches you what truly sustains you. Those who are satisfied too easily stop seeking what is real. But hunger for what is right draws you toward life. I spoke of those who weep, not to glorify sorrow, but to honor honesty. Tears mean you have not numbed yourself. They mean your heart is still alive. Comfort comes to those who allow themselves to feel. I told you that when people hate you because you follow me, you are not abandoned. You stand in a long line of those who spoke truth before you. Rejection does not cancel blessing. Often it confirms that you are walking a narrow path. Then I spoke words that unsettled you. I warned those who are rich, satisfied, laughing, and praised by all. Not because these things are evil, but because they can deceive you into thinking you are complete. Comfort can dull the soul. Praise can replace truth if you are not careful. I watched your faces as you listened. Some of you were relieved. Some of you were uncomfortable. That is how truth often arrives. It comforts the honest and challenges the secure. I told you to love your enemies. This was not a request for weakness. It was an invitation to freedom. Hatred binds you to those who hurt you. Love releases you from their control. I asked you to bless those who curse you, to pray for those who mistreat you, not because they deserve it, but because your heart deserves peace. What you return shapes who you become. I told you not to strike back, not to cling to possessions, not to measure generosity by what is fair. The kingdom does not operate on fairness alone. It operates on grace. I asked you to treat others as you wish to be treated, not as a rule to memorize, but as a mirror to examine your heart. How you treat others reveals what you believe about yourself. I warned you about judging. Judgment often hides fear. When you condemn others quickly, you avoid facing what still needs healing in you. Mercy opens space for growth. Judgment shuts it down. I spoke of blind guides leading blind people, of trees known by their fruit, of hearts revealed by what the mouth speaks. I wanted you to understand that faith is not proven by words, but by what flows from your life when pressure comes. I asked why you call me Lord but do not do what I say. Not to accuse you, but to invite alignment. Trust is not proven by titles. It is shown by obedience. I told you about foundations. Lives built on hearing alone collapse under storms. Lives built on hearing and doing stand firm. Storms come to everyone. What matters is what you built before they arrived. You listened quietly. Some of you nodded. Some of you wrestled. That was enough. The kingdom was taking root. As we walked together, many came to me with questions. Some asked sincerely. Others asked carefully, hoping for reassurance rather than truth. I listened to them all, because questions reveal where the heart is resting. One day, a man came running toward me. He knelt quickly, respectfully, earnestly. His life appeared ordered and admirable. He asked what he must do to inherit life that does not end. He expected a rule, a task, something measurable. I reminded him that goodness does not originate in human effort. What you call good flows from God alone. Then I spoke of commandments he already knew. He answered confidently. He had guarded these things from his youth. I looked at him with love, not suspicion, not disappointment, love. There was one thing still holding his heart. Not sin as he imagined it, but attachment he did not recognize. I told him to release what owned him, to give to those who lacked, and to follow me freely. His face changed, not because my words were cruel, but because they touched something deeply protected. He walked away sorrowful, not condemned, but unwilling. You watched this quietly. Some of you were confused, some of you were unsettled. You wondered if devotion required loss that felt unbearable. I told you how difficult it is for those who trust riches to enter the kingdom, not because wealth itself blocks the door, but because trust placed in possessions weakens trust placed in God. What you rely on most quietly becomes your master. You were astonished. You asked who could possibly be saved. You were thinking in terms of effort and reward. I reminded you that what is impossible for humans is not impossible for God. Grace reaches where strength cannot. Peter spoke what many of you were thinking. You had left homes, families, work, certainty. You wondered if that sacrifice was seen. I assured you that nothing released for the kingdom is forgotten. What is given in faith returns in ways you cannot yet imagine. But I also told you that the order of reward would surprise you. Those considered first often cling tightly. Those considered last often release freely. The kingdom reverses expectations, not to humiliate, but to heal. As we continued, I spoke again of what awaited me, of suffering, rejection, death, and rising. You heard the words, but your hearts struggled to accept them. You still imagined victory without cost. 2 of you asked for places of honor. You did not yet understand the nature of my reign. Authority in my kingdom does not dominate. Greatness does not sit above others. The greatest serve. The leader kneels. Life is given, not taken. I watched you absorb this slowly. I did not withdraw patience from you. Learning takes time. Transformation unfolds layer by layer. I reminded you that I came not to be served, but to serve, and to give my life, so others could live free. As we moved on, a blind man cried out to me. Many tried to silence him. But faith does not need permission. I called him forward. I asked what he wanted. Not because I did not know, but because faith must speak. When he asked for sight, I gave it. Not only to his eyes, but to his life. He followed us immediately. You saw then that faith is not proven by status or confidence, but by honesty and trust. What you hold too tightly will slow you. What you release will free you. And still, I walk with you. Before you understood my teachings, before you followed my steps along the road, before you trusted me with your future, you first had to see who I am. Some of you came because you were searching. Others came because someone you trusted pointed you toward me. None of you arrived fully certain. You came with curiosity, with questions, with quiet hope. That was enough. You had heard the words of the prophets. You knew of the promise that light would come into the world. But light is difficult to recognize when you have grown used to shadow. So I did not arrive with noise or force. I came gently, allowing those who wished to see to draw near. John spoke before me. He did not speak about himself. He prepared the way by telling the truth. He said he was not the light, but that the light was already coming. Some listened, some did not. Truth always divides listening hearts from closed ones. When I walked among you, many did not recognize me. They expected signs shaped like power. They expected authority that demanded attention. They did not expect the word to walk quietly, to speak simply, to stand among them without defense. But those who received me were given something new, not status, not control, but identity. You were given the right to become children of God, not through heritage, not through effort, but through trust. I called some of you personally. I saw you before you saw me. I spoke your name before you understood my voice. I did not test you. I invited you. When you asked where I was staying, I did not answer with an address. I said, "Come and see." Following always begins with presence. Truth is not learned from distance. As you walked with me, you began to understand that I was not merely a teacher. I was the Word made visible. What God has always spoken about life. I lived before you. You saw that truth is not an idea alone. It is embodied. It moves. It loves. It enters ordinary moments. It eats, walks, listens, and waits. You called me Rabbi, then Messiah, then Son of God, then King. Each name reflected a deeper layer of understanding. I did not correct your growth. I allowed it. I told you that greater things were ahead. Not spectacles meant to impress, but revelation meant to transform. You would see heaven opened, not as escape from the world, but as God present within it. You began to see that following me would reshape how you understand God. No longer distant, no longer hidden behind fear, but near, speaking, dwelling among you. You did not yet understand everything. That was not required. Seeing was beginning. Trust was forming. And from that first seeing, everything else would unfold. There was a man among the teachers who came to me quietly at night. He was careful, respected, knowledgeable. He did not come to challenge me, but he did not come openly either. Fear and curiosity often walked together at first. He spoke kindly. He acknowledged that what I did could not happen without God. Yet he still believed understanding could be reached through learning alone. So I spoke to him of something deeper. I told him that no one enters the kingdom by sight or effort alone. What is born of flesh remains flesh. What is born of spirit is something entirely new. The kingdom is not entered by adding knowledge to an old life, but by receiving new life altogether. This confused him. He was thinking of beginnings in terms of age and experience. But I was speaking of origin. To be born anew is not to start over by force, but to be reshaped from the source. I told him not to be surprised. Wind moves where it wills. You hear it, you feel it, but you cannot command it. So it is with the Spirit. Life given by God cannot be controlled, only received. He asked how these things could be. I answered gently. Knowledge alone cannot cross this threshold. Understanding follows surrender. The kingdom opens first to trust, then to clarity. I reminded him of a story from long ago. When people were dying, life came through looking upward in faith. Not through strength, not through remedy of their own making, but through trust in what God provided. So it is now. Life comes through belief, not belief shaped by fear, but belief shaped by love. I told him why I came. Not to condemn the world, but to save it. Judgment does not begin with punishment. It begins with response. Light reveals what is already present. Those who love truth come toward it. Those who prefer darkness hide from it. This is not because light is cruel, but because it is honest. It shows what needs healing. I told him that belief is not mere agreement. It is movement toward life. Those who trust step forward. Those who refuse remain where they are. The kingdom is not locked. It stands open, but it cannot be entered while clinging to the old self. What must die is not the body, but the illusion that control brings life. As the night faded, he left quietly. He did not yet understand fully, but a seed had been planted. And you, listening to these words, began to understand something new. Following me is not about improving what you already are. It is about becoming who you were meant to be. New life does not arrive with noise. It begins within. After you had walked with me for a while, after you had listened and watched and questioned, I sent more of you out. Not because you were finished learning, but because love is learned best by being given. I sent you ahead of me into towns and villages. You were not sent to prepare arguments. You were sent to prepare hearts. I told you the harvest was ready, but the workers were few. Truth had already been planted in many places. You were not beginning the work. You were stepping into it. I told you to go lightly. Do not load yourselves with what distracts you. Do not cling to comfort as though it were protection. When you enter a house, speak peace first. Peace reveals whether a heart is open. If peace is received, remain. If it is not, leave quietly. Love does not force itself where it is not welcomed. I warned you that not everyone would receive you. That was not failure. You were responsible for faithfulness, not response. Release the outcome to God. I told you to heal the sick and announce that the kingdom was near. Not because words alone convince, but because compassion reveals truth more clearly than explanation. When bodies are healed and dignity is restored, hearts begin to listen. You returned rejoicing. You spoke of power and authority. You were amazed by what happened when you trusted my name. I listened, and then I reminded you where joy should rest. Do not rejoice that spirits submit to you. Rejoice that your names are known. Power can distract you. Belonging anchors you. Then a lawyer came to test me. He asked how to inherit life. He knew the law, but he wanted limits. So I asked him what he read. He answered well. Love God fully. Love your neighbor as yourself. But he wanted definition. He asked who his neighbor was, so I told him a story. A man was wounded and left half dead. Some saw him and passed by. They had reasons, they had rules, they had schedules. But love was not among them. Then one came who was not expected to help. He saw the wounded man and stopped. He drew near. He bound wounds. He carried the burden. He paid the cost. Love was not delayed by questions of worth. I asked who acted as neighbor. The answer was clear, though difficult to say. The one who showed mercy. I told him to do likewise. Not to debate love, but to live it. Later, we rested in a home. One listened, one hurried, one received, one was anxious. I did not shame either, but I showed what matters most. There will always be many tasks, but presence cannot be postponed. Listening shapes everything else. As you walked away, you understood something new. Before you explain truth, you must embody it. Before you define love, you must practice it. This is how the kingdom moves. As the crowds grew larger, their voices louder, their expectations heavier, I turned my attention toward you. Crowds can listen without hearing. Followers must learn to see beneath the surface. I warned you first about what grows quietly and spreads unseen. Hypocrisy does not announce itself. It hides behind appearances. It pretends to be righteousness while protecting self-interest. I told you that nothing hidden remains hidden forever. Truth has a way of rising, even when buried deeply. You were tempted to fear exposure. So I spoke to you about fear itself. Not all fear is equal. Some fear threatens only the body. Other fear touches the soul. I reminded you that your life is held by God, not by those who shout the loudest or threaten the most. I spoke of sparrows again. Small, unnoticed creatures sold cheaply. Not one is forgotten. If God remembers them, how much more does he know you? Even the smallest details of your life are seen. Fear loses its power when you trust that you are known. I told you not to deny truth to protect yourself. What you acknowledge shapes who you become. Loyalty spoken aloud strengthens the heart. Silence born of fear weakens it. Then someone interrupted, asking me to settle a dispute over inheritance. I did not come to divide possessions, so I warned you instead about greed. Life is not measured by what you store away. Possession can quietly replace trust. I told you about a man whose land produced more than expected. He spoke only to himself. He planned only for comfort. He prepared for years he assumed he controlled. But he was not rich toward God. That night, his life was required of him. You grew quiet. I was not condemning preparation. I was exposing illusion. Security built without God collapses without warning. I told you not to worry about food or clothing. Worry consumes attention, but adds nothing to life. Birds do not store, yet they are fed. Flowers do not labor, yet they are clothed beautifully. If God cares for what fades quickly, how much more does he care for you? I reminded you that the world chases what it fears losing. But you belong to a different kingdom. Seek what is eternal first, and your needs will not be ignored. I told you not to be afraid, little flock. The kingdom is not earned, it is given. Release what weighs you down. Invest where loss cannot reach. I spoke of readiness, of lamps kept lit, of servants watching faithfully. Not because the master is harsh, but because trust remains alert. Some of you asked who these words were for. I answered that responsibility grows with understanding. What you know shapes what is required of you. Grace does not remove responsibility, it deepens it. I spoke of fire and division, not because I desire chaos, but because truth reveals what is real. You cannot read the sky and ignore the times you live in. Delay in reconciliation leads to greater loss. As we moved on, you understood something deeper. Fear narrows life. Greed blinds the heart. Trust opens the way. The kingdom is not found in what you protect. It is found in what you release. Early that morning, I returned to the place where people gathered to listen. You sat nearby, watching, learning quietly as you often did. The air was calm at first, but it did not remain that way. They brought a woman before me. She was placed in the center, not because they cared about truth, but because they wanted a trap. They spoke loudly of law, but softly of mercy. They spoke of judgment, but not of their own hearts. They reminded me of what was written. They asked what should be done. They were not seeking justice. They were seeking permission to condemn. I did not answer them at once. I bent down and wrote in the dust. Silence unsettles those who crave control. They pressed me again, louder this time. Still, I waited. Then I spoke. Not with anger, not with accusation. I invited honesty. I told the one without sin to be the first to act. One by one, they left. Not because they were forced, but because truth had touched their conscience. No one argued. No one defended themselves. The crowd thinned until only the woman remained. I looked up and asked where her accusers were. There were none. I told her I did not condemn her either. Not because her life did not matter, but because condemnation does not heal. I told her to leave her life of sin. Grace does not ignore truth. It restores dignity so that change becomes possible. Forgiveness opens the door that fear keeps closed. You watched this closely. You were learning something essential. The kingdom does not deny wrongdoing, but it refuses to destroy the one who has fallen. Truth and mercy walk together here. Later, I spoke again to the people. I told them I am the light of the world. Light does not argue with darkness, it reveals. Those who follow light do not remain lost. Some challenged me. They demanded proof. They trusted rules more than revelation. They spoke confidently, yet they did not understand what held them captive. I told them that truth makes people free. They resisted this. They believed freedom was heritage, not condition. But slavery often hides behind pride. What controls you is revealed by what you obey. I spoke of freedom that begins within, not rebellion, not defiance, but release from what binds the heart. They grew angry. Truth does this when it touches deeply guarded places. They claimed connection to God while rejecting what God was doing before them. I did not insult them. I named the contradiction. I told them that before their stories began, before their claims were formed, I am, not as boast, as truth. Some tried to silence me then, but my time had not yet come. Nothing unfolds before its hour. You walked away thoughtful. You had seen mercy disarm condemnation. You had heard truth confront pride. You were learning that the kingdom is not defended by force, but revealed by light. And that light was now shaping you. You have walked with me long enough now to ask questions not only about where I am leading you, but about where I came from. You have wondered why my beginning did not resemble power as the world defines it. So I tell you this, not as distant history, but as meaning that still speaks to you now. When I entered the world, I did not arrive in a palace. No doors were opened by authority. No guards stood at attention. There was no announcement shaped for rulers. The world did not pause to notice. I was born where space was borrowed, where animals rested, where the ordinary continued unaware. This was not accident. This was revelation. From the beginning, the kingdom has not depended on privilege. It does not require position to enter, nor does it favor the powerful first. My arrival showed you that God moves freely into the lowest places, not because they are low, but because they are open. Angels did not go to courts or councils. They went to shepherds, men accustomed to watching quietly through the night, men unnoticed by most, yet attentive enough to hear. They were not chosen because of status, but because they were awake. When the message came, it did not threaten, it did not demand. It announced joy. Joy meant for all people, not for a few, not for the deserving, for all. You must understand this. The kingdom does not spread through fear. It grows through joy received. The sign given was simple. A child, wrapped, resting. No display of force, no immediate victory, just presence. Peace did not arrive as silence between wars. It arrived as God entering human life. Peace is not absence of struggle. It is God with you in the middle of it. Simeon waited many years. He did not hurry God. He learned to recognize fulfillment when it came quietly. When he held me, he saw more than an infant. He saw promise completed. He saw light meant for all nations. Anna spoke to anyone who would listen. She did not command attention. She shared hope. She had learned that waiting does not make faith weaker. It makes it deeper. My parents returned to ordinary life. Work continued. Years passed without public signs. Growth happened unseen. You must hear this clearly. The kingdom often begins unnoticed. What God is doing may not announce itself loudly, but it is no less real. Do not despise small beginnings. Do not assume God is absent, because life feels ordinary. The greatest work often unfolds quietly, shaping hearts before it ever reshapes the world. I came as a child, so you would understand something essential. The kingdom does not arrive through domination. It arrives through presence, through trust, through humility. As you follow me now, remember where I began. Not to romanticize it, but to understand it. The same God who entered the world quietly is still at work in quiet ways within you, and the kingdom is still drawing near. When I sat down on the hillside and you gathered around me, I did not raise my voice. I did not stand above you. I sat so you would know this teaching was meant to be received, not endured. I looked at you carefully before I spoke. Some of you were tired. Some carried quiet grief. Some felt overlooked by life. Some wondered whether God truly saw them. So I began there. I spoke of blessing, not the kind measured by comfort or applause, but the kind rooted in truth. I told you that those who know their need are not forgotten. The kingdom belongs to those who do not pretend to be complete. I told you that those who mourn are not abandoned. Grief is not evidence of weak faith. It is evidence of love. Comfort does not erase sorrow instantly, but it meets it faithfully. I spoke of gentleness, not as passivity, but as strength that refuses to dominate. The gentle do not force their way forward, yet they inherit more than they grasp for. I told you that hunger for what is right is honored. Those who long for justice and truth will not remain empty. The kingdom satisfies what the world ignores. I spoke of mercy. Those who practice it discover they are not depleted by it. Mercy returns to the one who gives it, reshaping the heart into something freer. I told you that clarity of heart leads to clarity of vision. Those who seek purity are not naive. They see what truly matters. I named peacemakers as children of God. Not those who avoid conflict, but those who step into broken places to heal them. They reflect the heart of the Father. I warned you that following me would not always be welcomed. Truth often unsettles what is comfortable. Rejection does not remove blessing. It confirms allegiance. Then I spoke of your place in the world. You are salt. You preserve what would otherwise decay. You are light. You reveal what would otherwise remain hidden. Do not hide what you were given. I told you that I did not come to erase what God has spoken. I came to complete it. The law was not abolished. It was fulfilled in love. I taught you that righteousness is deeper than obedience alone. Anger carries the seed of harm. Reconciliation matters more than ritual. Integrity begins in the heart, not in performance. I spoke of desire. It shapes direction long before action appears. Guard your inner life, for it guides your steps. I told you to speak simply. Let truth stand without embellishment. Let your word be reliable. I taught you to respond without retaliation. Not because injustice is acceptable, but because violence multiplies harm. Generosity interrupts cycles of power. I told you to love your enemies, not because they are harmless, but because love breaks chains. Hatred cannot. God's care is not selective. Let yours reflect that. When I finished speaking, you were quiet, not overwhelmed, but attentive. The kingdom was not distant anymore. It was shaping how you lived. As you continued walking with me, you began to notice that my words were never meant to remain ideas. Everything I taught was meant to be lived, to move through hands and feet, to take shape in ordinary choices. I spoke to you again about love, because love is easily spoken of, yet difficult to practice when it costs something. I did not describe love as affection alone. I showed you that love reveals itself most clearly when it is offered where it is least expected. I told you to love those who oppose you, not because opposition is harmless, but because hatred reshapes the heart into something smaller. Love does not excuse wrong, but it refuses to let wrong define you. I asked you to do good to those who do not return it, to bless those who speak against you, to pray for those who wound you. This teaching unsettled you. You were taught to respond with balance and fairness, but the kingdom moves beyond fairness into mercy. I explained that retaliation mirrors the harm it resists. If you answer violence with violence, the cycle continues. If you answer insult with insult, nothing changes. But generosity interrupts what anger sustains. I told you to give without calculating return, not because loss is noble, but because trust reshapes the heart. What you cling to begins to control you. What you release loosens its grip. I reminded you that the measure you use will be the measure you receive, not as punishment, but as reflection. Harshness multiplies harshness. Mercy multiplies mercy. I spoke again about judgment, not to deny discernment, but to expose pride. You cannot heal what you refuse to see clearly. When you judge without humility, you blind yourself to your own need for grace. I used simple images, blind guides leading blind people, students becoming like their teachers, trees known by their fruit. Life reveals what the heart has cultivated. I told you that words flow from what fills the heart. You cannot speak life while feeding on bitterness. You cannot offer peace while nurturing resentment. Inner life shapes outer action. I asked you why you call me Lord while ignoring what I say. Not to shame you, but to invite honesty. Trust that does not move your life remains incomplete. I spoke of foundations again, of storms that come to everyone. Those who listen but do not act build on sand. Those who listen and live build on rock. The difference is revealed only when pressure comes. You were learning that faith is not proven in calm moments. It is revealed when life shakes you. Following me is not about avoiding storms. It is about being rooted deeply enough to stand. I watched you absorb these words slowly. Some of you recognized yourselves in them. Some resisted quietly. That is part of learning. The kingdom was no longer theoretical to you. It was asking for your hands, your voice, your response. And still, I walked with you patiently, teaching you how love becomes visible. As you listened to my teaching, I knew there was a danger you might miss. It is possible to hear truth and still walk away unchanged. So I spoke to you plainly about choice, because every life moves in a direction, whether intentionally or not. I told you not to judge as though you stand above others. Judgment that lacks humility blinds the one who gives it. When you focus on the faults of another, you often avoid facing what still needs healing within you. I was not asking you to ignore truth, but to see it clearly, beginning with your own heart. I spoke of asking, seeking, and knocking, not as formulas to control God, but as posture of trust. Those who ask openly reveal dependence. Those who seek reveal hunger. Those who knock reveal perseverance. God does not delight in withholding good gifts. He responds as a father, not as a gatekeeper. I reminded you that love must be practiced deliberately. Treat others as you wish to be treated. This is not simplification. It is fulfillment. Everything God desires for human relationship is contained in this movement toward empathy. Then I spoke of paths. One is wide and easy. Many walk it without thinking. It asks little and promises comfort, but it leads away from life. The other path is narrow. It requires attention. It demands intention. Few choose it because it resists convenience, but it leads toward fullness. I did not hide the cost. I honored the choice. I warned you about voices that sound convincing, but lead hearts astray. Not all who speak in God's name speak from God's heart. You will recognize truth not by volume or appearance, but by fruit. Life reveals what words attempt to conceal. I told you that not everyone who speaks devotion belongs to the kingdom. Words alone do not build relationship. Doing the will of God reveals alignment. Obedience is not perfection. It is sincerity lived out. These words were difficult. You realized that proximity to truth does not guarantee transformation. Hearing is not the same as living. Association is not the same as belonging. So I ended where I began, with foundations. I spoke of two builders. Both heard the same words. Both constructed lives. One built on stone, the other built on sand. The difference was not visible at first. Storms came to both. Pressure does not discriminate. What matters is what you built before the storm arrived. Those who hear and live stand firm. Those who hear and delay collapse. I did not speak these things to frighten you. I spoke them to steady you. Life will test what you believe. Choose carefully what you build upon. When I finished speaking, you sensed authority, not because I demanded it, but because truth stood firm. The kingdom was still open. The path was still before you, and the choice was still yours. As we traveled together through villages and along open roads, I noticed how often people spoke about me, yet how rarely they understood me. Opinions followed us everywhere. Some said I was a prophet. Some said I reminded them of voices from the past. Few listened long enough to recognize what stood before them. So one day, as we walked, I turned to you and asked a simple question. Who do people say that I am? You answered honestly. You repeated what you had heard. The words carried respect, but they stopped short of truth. Then I asked you something more personal. I asked who you believed me to be. The road grew quiet. This was no longer a question you could answer by repetition. It required trust. One of you spoke, saying that I was the one sent by God. The words were true, yet still incomplete in your understanding. I warned you not to rush ahead of revelation. Truth unfolds in its time. What you confess must be lived, not merely spoken. Then I told you something that unsettled you. I spoke openly about suffering, rejection, death, and rising again. You heard the words, but they collided with your expectations. You wanted victory without cost. You wanted glory without pain. One of you pulled me aside, trying to correct me. Your concern was sincere, but it was shaped by fear. You did not yet understand that love sometimes leads through loss before it leads to life. I spoke firmly, not to wound you, but to protect truth. The way of God does not mirror the way of power. Preserving comfort at all costs can quietly oppose what God is doing. Then I turned again to all of you. I told you what following me truly means. Not admiration, not agreement, but surrender. Whoever wants to save their life by holding it tightly will lose it. Whoever releases their life in trust will find it renewed. What is gained by the world cannot replace what is lost within the soul. I told you not to be ashamed of truth. Fear of rejection silences conviction. But courage grows when allegiance is clear. You listened quietly. Some of you were afraid. Some of you were confused. That was expected. Learning trust takes time. As we continued walking, you carried this question with you. Not just who I am, but who you are becoming by following me. This was not a test. It was an invitation. The path ahead would reveal the answer. There are moments you remember my words, and moments you forget that I also learned by living. Before crowds listened to me, before you followed me, there were years of quiet faithfulness. I want you to understand this, because the kingdom grows in ways that are often unseen. When I was young, I did not teach publicly. I did not reveal everything at once. I listened, I learned, I obeyed. Not because I lacked authority, but because obedience shapes the heart before authority is exercised. When my parents brought me to the temple, there were those who recognized what God was doing. Not many, only those who had learned to wait. Waiting sharpens vision. Those who rush past ordinary days often miss what God is quietly revealing. I stayed behind to listen and to ask questions, not to display knowledge, but to grow in understanding. Wisdom does not resist learning. It welcomes it. When my parents found me, they were afraid. Concern often speaks before understanding. I reminded them that I must be about my Father's work. Yet I returned with them. I did not demand independence. I honored relationship. You must hear this clearly. Submission is not weakness, it is alignment. Obedience does not diminish purpose, it prepares it. I grew in wisdom and in favor. Not overnight, not publicly. Growth is not always visible to others, but it is always shaping you. I lived among ordinary people. I worked with my hands. I experienced routine. This was not delay. It was formation. You sometimes grow impatient with hidden seasons. You want immediate fruit. You want recognition. But the kingdom does not rush maturity. Roots grow before branches stretch outward. Learn from this. Faithfulness in small things is not wasted time. Listening matters. Learning matters. Obedience matters. When the time came for me to speak openly, I did not begin unprepared. What was lived quietly now spoke with authority. So do not despise the unseen seasons of your life. God is not absent there. He is forming you. The kingdom often advances not through sudden movement, but through patient faithfulness. And what is formed in quiet obedience will one day stand firm in public truth. As the hour drew closer and the weight of what lay ahead pressed quietly upon us, I saw the unease in your faces. You had followed me through roads and villages, through wonder and opposition, and now uncertainty settled among you like a shadow. So I spoke gently, not to hurry you, but to steady you. I told you not to let your hearts be troubled, not because trouble would disappear, but because fear does not need to rule you. Trust is not the absence of uncertainty. It is the choice to remain anchored when answers feel distant. I reminded you that God's dwelling is not small or limited. There is room enough. Nothing is crowded. No one is excluded. I was not leaving to abandon you, but to prepare what you could not yet see. You wondered where I was going. You wondered how you could follow if you did not know the way. So I told you plainly, the way is not a path you memorize. It is a life you walk with me. Truth is not information alone. It is relationship. Life is not found by searching elsewhere. It is received by remaining close. I told you that knowing me means knowing the Father. Not because God has changed, but because I reveal what has always been true. God is not distant or unknowable. He is near, working, speaking, loving. You asked to see more. You wanted certainty shaped for sight. I told you that what you had already seen was enough. Every act of compassion, every word of truth, every moment of mercy had revealed the heart of God. I spoke to you about trust again. Not trust that demands proof, but trust that grows through relationship. Those who remain in me will not be alone in what comes next. I promised that you would not be left without help. Presence would not end with my departure. The Spirit would come, not as replacement, but as continuation. You would be guided, reminded, strengthened. I told you that peace would be given to you, not the fragile peace the world offers, dependent on circumstances, but a deeper peace, steady even when life shakes. You were afraid of what change would bring, so I told you not to let fear take hold. Love remains stronger than fear. Connection remains stronger than separation. I spoke of love as obedience, not obedience shaped by pressure, but obedience born from trust. Those who love me live what I teach, not perfectly, but sincerely. I told you that the world would not always understand you. Truth often unsettles what prefers control. But you were not walking alone. You were never walking alone. As I finished speaking, I saw calm returning to your eyes. Not because everything was clear, but because trust was taking root. The path ahead would not be easy, but it would be held. And so would you. There are truths that cannot be learned from a distance. They must be received before they are understood. Love is like this. You do not master it first. You are met by it. I spoke to you about new life again, because you were still tempted to believe that change begins with effort. You wanted clear steps, measurable progress, proof that you were moving forward. But life from God does not begin with striving. It begins with being loved. I told you that God's love moved first, not after the world was ready, not after people proved themselves worthy. Love came while the world was still learning how broken it was. Love did not wait for understanding. It acted. This is difficult for you to accept. You are used to earning. You are used to measuring. But love that must be earned is never secure. The love of God is given freely, so that trust can grow without fear. I told you that belief is not agreement alone. It is leaning your life into what you trust. Those who believe step toward light. Those who fear exposure remain hidden. Light does not shame. It reveals so that healing can begin. I spoke to you about judgment because you misunderstood it. Judgment was not sent to destroy you. Light reveals truth, and response reveals the heart. Those who turn toward truth find life. Those who turn away choose distance. I wanted you to understand that rescue was the purpose, not condemnation, not exclusion. The world was not abandoned to its brokenness. Love entered it. I spoke of being lifted up, not as a symbol of power, but as a sign of healing. Life flows where trust looks upward instead of inward. You were learning that salvation is not escape from the world, but restoration within it. Life is not found by avoiding brokenness, but by letting love enter it. I told you again that belief carries consequence, not because God is harsh, but because trust shapes direction. What you turn toward, you follow. What you follow shapes who you become. Some of you were quiet, others were relieved. You were beginning to understand that faith is not fragile. It rests on love that moved first. You did not choose love. Love chose you. You did not begin the story. You were invited into it. And from that love, everything else would grow. As we continued on the road, people kept bringing their expectations with them. Some came seeking answers. Some came seeking advantage. Some came carrying others who could not reach me on their own. You watched carefully because you were still learning how the kingdom values people. They brought children to me. Small, unimportant by the world's measure. No questions to impress me. No accomplishments to present. Just presence. You tried to protect me from interruption. You thought importance required order. I stopped you, not with anger, but with clarity. You were thinking like the world thinks. I wanted you to see differently. I welcomed the children. I told you that the kingdom belongs to those like them, not because they are innocent in every way, but because they receive without calculation. They trust without bargaining. They do not secure their place through achievement. You were surprised again. The kingdom keeps overturning what you assume. Then we continued, and again someone asked about life that endures. You remembered the question. You remembered the cost. And you remembered how tightly hearts can hold what feels secure. I told you again that what blocks the kingdom is not lack, but attachment. Hands full of possessions struggle to receive what is given freely. Trust cannot grow where control dominates. You began to understand that surrender is not loss. It is exchange. What you release does not disappear. It is transformed. You asked again, who could be saved? The question came from fear. I answered with hope. What humans cannot achieve, God accomplishes through grace. Then you spoke of what you had left behind. Homes, families, certainty. I did not dismiss your sacrifice. I honored it. But I also reminded you that the kingdom reshapes reward. What is gained now may not look like what you expected. What is received later will exceed what you imagined. I told you again that the first and last are often reversed. Not to shame the confident, but to lift those who believe they are unseen. As we moved on, you saw that the kingdom does not measure worth by position. It sees the heart. It welcomes the small. It honors trust. It lifts the overlooked. And you were learning, slowly, to let go of how the world taught you to measure life. After you had walked with me longer, after you had listened and watched how the kingdom moves, I sent you out again. This time, you went with more understanding, yet still with much to learn. The kingdom teaches through movement, not through stillness alone. I did not send you to impress. I sent you to serve. You were to enter towns quietly, carrying peace before words. Where peace was received, you were to remain. Where it was not, you were to leave without resentment. The kingdom does not force itself into closed hearts. You were told again to travel lightly. What weighs you down distracts you. The message does not need decoration. Truth carries its own authority when spoken with compassion. I instructed you to heal and to speak of the kingdom drawing near. Healing opens ears. Mercy prepares hearts. When people experience care, they become ready to hear truth. You returned filled with excitement. You spoke of power, of authority, of victory. You were amazed at what happened when you trusted what I gave you. I listened, and then I redirected your joy. I told you not to rest your joy in power. Power can intoxicate. It can quietly replace trust. I told you to rejoice instead that your names are known. Belonging matters more than ability. Identity matters more than success. I spoke of seeing what many long to see. Prophets hoped for this day. Kings waited for it. Yet you were living within it. Gratitude grows when you recognize what has been given. Then someone asked again about life that lasts. He wanted boundaries. He wanted to know how little love required. So I gave him a story instead of a rule. I told you of a man wounded and left behind. Those expected to help passed by. They had reasons, they had obligations, but compassion did not guide them. Then one came from outside expectation. He stopped. He drew near. He touched wounds. He carried burden. He paid cost. He did not ask if help was deserved. He acted because mercy saw need. I asked who lived as neighbor. The answer was clear. The one who showed mercy. I told you to live the same way, not by defining love, but by practicing it. Later, we rested. One listened, one worried. Both were loved, but presence was named as essential. Activity must not replace attention. You were learning that service without listening becomes noise. Love without presence becomes effort. The kingdom grows where hearts remain attentive. And so you returned, changed. Not because you succeeded, but because you learned humility. The kingdom was shaping you, in going and in returning. When the silence of the early morning broke, and the weight of grief still pressed heavily upon you, you believed that the story had ended. You had watched hope buried. You had seen fear scatter you. You had locked yourselves away, unsure of what remained. But the kingdom does not end where humans place stones. When you went to the place of burial, you expected finality. You carried spices meant for closure. Instead, you found emptiness where death was expected. Not absence, but transformation. You were told not to be afraid. Fear had already taken enough from you. I had not risen to shame you for your doubt, but to restore you from it. Love does not return with accusation. It returns with peace. I sent word to you through voices you did not expect, because the kingdom often speaks through those the world overlooks. You were reminded of what I had already told you. Truth spoken earlier becomes clear when the moment arrives. When you heard that I was alive, some of you struggled to believe. Grief clouds memory. Fear resists hope. Yet disbelief did not cancel what was true. Life had already overcome death. When I met you again, I did not come with anger. I came with patience. I spoke to you about trust, not to condemn hesitation, but to strengthen resolve. Then I sent you out, not as witnesses of tragedy, but as carriers of good news. You were not to announce fear or judgment. You were to speak life. You were to proclaim that death does not have the final word. I told you to go into all the world, not to conquer, but to invite, not to dominate, but to testify. The kingdom advances through witness, not through force. Those who receive the message receive life. Those who resist are not destroyed by it. Truth does not coerce, it waits. I promised that you would not go alone. Signs would accompany obedience, not to draw attention to yourselves, but to confirm that life was still at work among you. I reminded you again that authority flows from trust, protection flows from obedience, presence flows from faithfulness. When I was taken from your sight, I was not removed from your work. I remained active. I remained present. The kingdom did not pause. You went out hesitant, yet obedient. You spoke, and life followed. Not because you were powerful, but because the message was true. You learned that resurrection is not only something to believe, it is something to carry. Hope must be spoken. Life must be shared. And so the kingdom continued to move. Through your voices, through your steps, through your trust. After you had begun to carry the good news outward, I knew your hearts would still be tested inwardly. Fear does not vanish simply because truth has been seen. It returns quietly, asking what you will trust when no one is watching. So I spoke to you again, not to add burden, but to steady your inner life. I warned you about what grows unseen, not storms, but yeast. Hypocrisy works slowly. It pretends to protect you while hollowing you out. When outer words no longer match inner truth, the soul begins to fracture. I told you this so you would remain whole. I reminded you that nothing hidden stays hidden, not to frighten you, but to free you. Living truthfully removes the weight of secrecy. What you live in the light does not need defending. I spoke to you about fear again, not the fear of danger, but the fear that silences faith. Those who threaten your body do not hold your life. Life rests with God alone. Knowing this does not remove hardship, but it removes terror. I returned again to small creatures, sparrows, uncounted, unnoticed, yet not forgotten. You are known more deeply than you realize. Fear shrinks when you trust that you are seen. I told you not to deny truth when pressure rises. What you acknowledge shapes who you become. Faith spoken strengthens faith lived. Silence born of fear erodes courage slowly. Someone asked again about possessions. I did not divide wealth. I exposed illusion. Greed disguises itself as security. Life does not consist of what you store. It is measured by what you trust. I told you again of a man who prepared for years he could not guarantee. He planned for comfort, but not for meaning. His barns were full. His soul was empty. I wanted you to see that preparation without God leads to loss unseen. I spoke gently. To you, then. Do not worry about food or clothing. Worry drains energy but produces nothing. Life is more than survival. Trust frees attention for what truly matters. I reminded you that the kingdom is given, not earned. Fear tells you to hoard. Trust teaches you to release. Treasure placed beyond loss frees the heart. I spoke of lamps again, of readiness, not because the master is harsh, but because faith remains attentive. Waiting with trust is not anxiety. It is hope held awake. You asked who these warnings were for. I told you responsibility grows with understanding. What you know shapes what is required. Grace does not excuse neglect. It invites faithfulness. I told you that truth will divide, not because it desires conflict, but because it reveals what is real. You cannot read the world and ignore the moment you live in. Delay in reconciliation leads to deeper loss. I spoke these things not to trouble you, but to free you. Fear narrows life. Trust opens it. The kingdom does not belong to those who protect themselves most carefully. It belongs to those who live ready, open, and unafraid. And I was still teaching you how to live that way. There are moments when truth must be spoken again, not because it has changed, but because your understanding has deepened. So I spoke to you once more about light, not as metaphor alone, but as reality you were learning to live within. Before anything you see was formed, before paths were walked or words were written, the word already was. Not silent, not distant, present. Life itself flowed from that word. And that life was meant to become light for all people. Light does not force itself upon the eyes. It simply shines. Those who want to see move toward it. Those who fear exposure turn away. This has always been so. The darkness does not overcome light, but it often resists it. I told you that light entered the world quietly, not with thunder, not with spectacle. Many did not recognize it. Some rejected it outright. Familiarity can blind more effectively than ignorance. Yet those who received the light were changed, not by effort, by trust. They were given a new identity, not inherited, not earned, given. I reminded you that becoming children of God does not come through bloodline, or through human striving, or through force of will. It comes through receiving what God gives freely. I spoke again of John, who was not the light, but pointed toward it. His role was not to be admired, but to direct attention away from himself. Truthful witness never seeks ownership of truth. You began to understand that following me meant stepping into light that reveals as much as it heals. Light shows where you are standing. It also shows where you are being led. I told you that the word did not remain distant. It became flesh. It walked. It ate. It rested. It shared your world. Truth did not shout from above. It dwelled among you. Some of you struggled with this. You expected God to remain untouchable, but love seeks closeness. Distance protects power. Presence reveals care. I spoke of glory, not as display of dominance, but as grace revealed through truth. You were beginning to see that strength expressed through mercy reveals God more clearly than force ever could. You listened differently now. What once sounded mysterious was becoming familiar. Not ordinary, but near. Light was no longer something you searched for. It was something you walked within. And walking in light was changing how you saw others, how you saw yourselves, and how you trusted God. The kingdom was not hidden in darkness. It was unfolding in light. And you were learning how to live there. As you listened to me longer, I saw how easily your hearts were pulled in many directions. You wanted to live faithfully, yet worry whispered constantly about what you would eat, what you would wear, how you would be seen, and whether you would have enough. So I spoke to you about where your life is truly anchored. I told you to be careful not to practice righteousness for display. When goodness becomes performance, it loses its freedom. Acts meant to draw attention often empty the heart quietly. What is done to be seen by others has already received its reward. I spoke to you about giving, not as obligation, but as trust expressed. True generosity does not announce itself. It flows from a heart that knows it is already provided for. What is done quietly is not unnoticed by God. I spoke to you about prayer, not as repetition meant to persuade, but as relationship meant to sustain. You do not need many words to be heard. God already knows your need before your voice forms the request. Prayer is not about informing God. It is about aligning your heart. I taught you how to pray simply, to honor God first, to welcome His will, to trust Him daily, to seek forgiveness honestly, to extend forgiveness freely. Prayer shapes humility before it ever shapes outcomes. I warned you about fasting for appearance. Discipline that seeks praise feeds pride rather than faith. What is practiced in secret forms the soul quietly and deeply. Then I spoke to you about treasure. What you store reveals what you trust. What is kept only on earth remains vulnerable to loss. But what is placed in God's care cannot be taken away. I told you that the eye shapes the body. What you focus on directs where you walk. If your attention is divided, your inner life becomes restless. Clarity of vision leads to wholeness. I told you plainly that you cannot serve two masters. Divided loyalty fragments the heart. Trust requires direction. You will follow what you rely on most. Then I spoke gently about worry, not to shame you, but to release you. Worry does not lengthen life. It shortens peace. It consumes energy without adding meaning. I pointed again to birds and fields. They do not strategize for survival, yet they are sustained. If God cares for what is temporary, how much more does He care for you? I told you to seek first the kingdom, not as escape from responsibility, but as foundation for it. When what matters most is clear, everything else finds its place. I reminded you not to borrow fear from tomorrow. Each day carries its own weight. Grace arrives with the moment, not before it is needed. You listened more quietly now. Your striving began to loosen. You were learning that trust is not passive, it is focused. The kingdom was teaching you how to live free from anxiety by anchoring your heart in what truly lasts. After I spoke to you about blessing and trust, I wanted you to understand your place in the world. Following me was never meant to pull you away from people. It was meant to shape how you live among them. So I spoke to you about what you already were becoming. I told you that you are salt. Salt does not draw attention to itself, yet its absence is always noticed. It preserves what would otherwise decay. It brings out what is already present. I wanted you to see that quiet faithfulness matters. You do not need to be loud to be effective. I warned you not to lose what makes salt useful. When salt loses its purpose, it cannot be restored. Faith lived only in name slowly empties of life. Remain true to what you have received. Do not dilute it to avoid discomfort. Then I told you that you are light. Light does not argue with darkness. It reveals. It shows what is real. I did not give you light so you could hide it. What has been placed within you is meant to be seen through your life. I spoke of a city on a hill. It cannot be hidden, not because it demands attention, but because presence makes it visible. A lamp is not lit to be concealed. It is lifted so others can see. I told you to let your light shine so that others may see goodness and recognize God at work. This was not permission to perform. It was an invitation to live honestly. Goodness seen through humility draws hearts more effectively than argument. You were learning that influence does not come from control. It comes from consistency. People notice what you do more than what you claim. Truth lived quietly often speaks louder than words shouted. I reminded you again that I had not come to undo what God has spoken. I came to complete it. The law was not meant to burden you. It was meant to guide you toward life. Fulfillment does not remove meaning. It deepens it. I told you that faithfulness reaches beyond outward obedience. Anger carries seeds of harm long before violence appears. Reconciliation matters deeply. Integrity begins beneath behavior. Truth spoken without love misses the heart of God. You were beginning to see that righteousness is not about being better than others. It is about being whole. Alignment matters more than appearance. As you listened, you understood something new. You were not called to withdraw from the world. You were called to live differently within it. Salt does not abandon food. Light does not avoid darkness. They enter quietly and change what surrounds them. And so does the kingdom when it takes root in you. As the crowds gathered more tightly around us, I noticed how differently people listened. Many heard my words, yet few allowed them to settle deeply. Some wanted signs. Some wanted certainty without change. Others simply wanted comfort without truth. So I began to speak to you in stories. Parables are not meant to confuse. They are meant to reveal. They invite the listener to lean in. Those who listen with patience discover meaning. Those who listen only for surface answers move on unchanged. The kingdom is not hidden from the willing. It is concealed from the careless. I told you of a farmer who scattered seed. The same seed fell on different ground. Some hardened by the path. Some shallow and quick to rise, yet unable to endure heat. Some crowded by thorns that slowly choked life. And some fell on good soil, where it grew, multiplied, and flourished. I wanted you to see that the message itself does not change. What changes is the heart that receives it. Hearing is not the same as receiving. Growth requires depth, patience, and space. You were learning to examine not only what you heard, but how you listened. I told you that the kingdom grows quietly. Like seed buried in the ground, its work is often unseen at first. You cannot measure it day by day. But in time, life becomes visible. Do not mistake silence for absence. I spoke of weeds growing among wheat. Not everything false is obvious at first. Good and harmful often grow side by side for a season. Judgment rushed too quickly can destroy what is still becoming good. Wisdom waits. I told you the kingdom is small in appearance, like a mustard seed. Yet what begins almost unnoticed can become a place of shelter and life. Do not despise beginnings that seem insignificant. God delights in growth that surprises. I spoke of yeast mixed into dough. It works slowly, quietly, thoroughly. The kingdom transforms from within. It does not need force to spread. Change that lasts begins beneath the surface. I told you of treasure hidden in a field, of a pearl worth everything. The kingdom is not stumbled upon accidentally. Those who recognize its value release lesser things without regret. Joy replaces loss when worth is understood. I spoke of nets gathering many kinds of fish. Not everything gathered remains. Truth eventually clarifies what belongs. But sorting comes at the proper time, not before growth has finished. Later, when we were alone, I explained these things more fully. Understanding deepens in relationship. Truth unfolds when trust remains. I told you that those trained for the kingdom bring out both what is old and what is new. God's work does not discard what came before. It completes it. As you listened, you began to see why I spoke this way. The kingdom is not imposed. It is discovered. It grows where hearts remain open, patient and willing. And you were learning how to listen deeply. As you prepared to speak and act in my name, I knew fear would rise quietly within you. Not fear of the unknown alone, but fear of rejection. Being seen, being heard, being opposed. These things weigh heavily on the heart. So I spoke to you plainly, not to harden you, but to steady you. I reminded you that you were being sent, not drifting. You did not carry your own authority. You carried mine. That did not mean the road would be easy. It meant the road would be meaningful. I told you that not everyone would receive you. Some would listen. Some would resist. Some would speak against you without understanding. This was not failure. It was reality. Truth unsettles what people have built their lives upon. I told you not to fear those who oppose you. Their power is limited. They may speak loudly, they may threaten, but they do not hold your life. Fear loses its grip when you remember who you belong to. I reminded you that nothing spoken in secret remains hidden. Faithfulness lived quietly will be revealed in time. Truth does not need defense forever. It stands on its own. I spoke to you again about sparrows, small lives, easily overlooked, yet never forgotten. If God attends to what seems insignificant, how much more does He care for you? You are not expendable. You are known. I told you that even your smallest details are seen. Nothing is wasted. No act of trust goes unnoticed. You are never invisible to God, even when the world refuses to see you. I warned you not to deny truth to protect comfort. What you acknowledge shapes your inner life. Faith spoken strengthens courage. Fear-fed silence erodes it. I also told you something difficult. Following me would sometimes divide relationships. Not because love fails, but because truth demands a response. Peace built on denial cannot endure. Loyalty will be tested. I told you that loving me would sometimes cost you what feels dear. But what is lost for truth is never truly lost. What is surrendered is received again in ways you cannot yet imagine. I reminded you that welcoming those I send is welcoming me. And welcoming me is welcoming God Himself. No act of hospitality is small. No kindness is wasted. Even a cup of water offered in trust matters. The kingdom measures differently than the world. It sees intention, not applause. As you listened, your fear did not vanish, but it changed shape. It no longer controlled you. Trust began to stand where fear once ruled. You were learning that courage is not absence of fear, but obedience in its presence. And the kingdom moved forward through you anyway. As we sat near the water and the crowd pressed in, I could see how eager many were for results. They wanted proof that could be measured quickly. They wanted change that could be counted and confirmed. So I spoke to you again about growth, because the kingdom does not move at the pace of impatience. I told you that a farmer scatters seed and then sleeps. Day after day passes, and the farmer does not command the growth. He does not pull on the shoots or rush the soil. Life rises on its own, first the blade, then the head, then the full grain. This is how the kingdom works. You must understand this. Growth does not depend on constant effort or control. God brings life in His time. Your role is faithfulness, not force. Trust the process you cannot see. I reminded you again about listening. Not everyone who hears truly listens. Attention shapes outcome. What you receive with openness grows. What you receive carelessly slips away. Truth demands patience. I told you that the measure you use will be the measure returned to you. Those who lean in receive more understanding. Those who remain distant lose even what they think they know. The kingdom responds to desire, not indifference. I spoke again of small beginnings. A mustard seed is easily overlooked. It fits in the palm of your hand. Yet when planted, it becomes something far larger than expected. Shelter forms where none was visible before. The kingdom begins humbly, but it does not remain small. I wanted you to see that power does not announce itself loudly. It grows steadily. Quiet faithfulness outlasts spectacle. What seems insignificant today may become refuge tomorrow. Later, as we crossed the water, a storm rose suddenly. Waves struck the boat. Fear rose in you faster than faith. You woke me, afraid that we would not survive. I stood and spoke peace into chaos. Then I asked you why fear had taken hold. Not to shame you, but to reveal what you still trusted. Nature obeyed my voice, yet your hearts still wrestled with trust. You were beginning to understand that the same power that quiets storms is at work quietly within you. If it can still the sea, it can sustain your life. I told you these things so you would not mistake silence for absence. The kingdom does not need noise to advance. It grows beneath the surface, steady, certain, alive. Trust what God is growing, even when you cannot yet see it. This is how the kingdom comes. As we continued on the road, you were thinking again about position. You did not speak it aloud at first, but I could see it in the way you watched one another, in the quiet comparisons, in the unspoken questions about who mattered most. The world had taught you that greatness rises by being seen, that authority comes from standing above others, that importance is proven by control. So I spoke to you again, because the kingdom does not follow this pattern. You asked me about places of honor, about sitting near power, about being remembered as significant. Your desire was not evil. It was simply shaped by what you had been taught. I asked if you understood what you were asking. Glory in the kingdom does not arrive without cost. It is not seized. It is given, and it is shaped through sacrifice. You did not yet understand, so I did not shame you. I gathered all of you and spoke clearly. In the world, rulers dominate. They measure success by how many serve them. But this is not how the kingdom lives. Here, the one who wishes to lead learns first how to serve. The one who desires greatness learns how to kneel. I told you that authority in the kingdom is not exercised over others, but for them. It lifts rather than presses down. It listens rather than demands. It protects rather than exploits. I reminded you of my own path. I did not come to be served. I came to serve. I did not come to take life, but to give it. This is the center of the kingdom. Love expressed through action. As we moved forward, you saw again how this truth lived itself out. Someone called out to me from the roadside. A blind man, dismissed by many, refused to be silenced. He cried out with trust, not status. You tried to quiet him. Order felt important to you. But I stopped and called him forward. I asked what he wanted. Faith must speak. When he asked to see, I restored his sight. Not only to his eyes, but to his life. And immediately, he followed us. You watched and understood something more. The kingdom does not bypass the overlooked. It stops for them. It listens. It responds. Greatness did not belong to those walking at the front. It belonged to the one who trusted openly and to the one who served quietly. You were learning that following me would slowly reshape your idea of success. Not upward, but outward. Not toward control, but toward love. This is how the kingdom reveals true greatness. As the road turned toward Jerusalem, you felt the change before you understood it. My steps did not slow, yet the weight of what lay ahead grew heavier in your thoughts. You followed, uncertain, uneasy, and afraid to ask everything you felt. I walked ahead of you, not to distance myself, but because obedience sometimes requires resolve that others are still learning to trust. You were amazed by my determination. You were also afraid. Both can exist together. I spoke to you again about what awaited me, not in riddles this time. I told you plainly about suffering, rejection, death, and rising again. You heard the words, but your hearts resisted them. You wanted the kingdom without loss. You wanted victory without pain. I did not soften the truth. Love does not protect by hiding reality. It prepares by revealing it. As we moved closer, You saw crowds gathering again, hope and misunderstanding walking side by side. Some expected power to overturn Rome. Others expected miracles to meet their needs. Few understood that the greatest work was about to happen quietly, through surrender rather than force. I knew you were still measuring the kingdom by what could be seen. So I kept walking. Jerusalem was not merely a destination. It was a decision. It was where truth would be confronted, where fear would reveal itself, and where love would be tested fully. I did not walk toward danger because I was unaware of it. I walked toward it because love does not retreat from what must be healed. Avoidance may protect comfort, but it does not bring life. You followed even when you did not understand. That mattered more than clarity. Faith often walks before understanding arrives. I wanted you to learn this. Obedience is not always loud. Sometimes it is simply continuing forward when every instinct urges retreat. Trust is not proven by emotion, but by direction. As we approached the city, you still argued quietly about position and outcome. I did not rebuke you harshly. Growth does not happen all at once. It unfolds through experience. You did not yet understand that the kingdom would be revealed not through triumphal display, but through sacrificial love, not through seizing authority, but through laying life down. I kept walking because the path mattered, because love required it, because life would come through surrender. One day, you would look back and understand that every step toward Jerusalem was a step toward your freedom as well. And though fear walked beside you, so did purpose. When we came near the city, you could feel the tension in the air. Hope and expectation moved through the streets like wind before a storm. Many were waiting for something to change, though few understood what kind of change was needed. I sent some of you ahead, not to arrange power, but to prepare obedience. You found what I said you would find, not because circumstances obey me unwillingly, but because hearts were already being moved. Sometimes preparation has been taking place long before you arrive. You only step into what God has already begun. As I entered the city, voices rose. People spread cloaks and branches, calling out words of praise they only partly understood. They expected a king who would rise above them. They did not yet recognize a king who would walk among them. You watched closely. Some of you were filled with excitement. Others were uneasy. Praise can be intoxicating. I did not stop the voices, but I did not depend on them either. Approval is fleeting. Obedience is lasting. I went straight to the place of worship, not to admire it, but to reveal what had been hidden beneath routine. The house meant for prayer had become crowded with noise and transaction. Reverence had been replaced by convenience. I did not act out of anger alone. I acted out of care. You saw how quickly praise turned into confusion. Those who celebrated one day questioned the next. Crowds follow momentum. Disciples follow truth. I taught openly in the city. I spoke of trust, of humility, of vigilance. I told you that appearance does not equal faithfulness. Leaves without fruit promise life they cannot give. What matters is what grows quietly within. I watched leaders question me. They spoke with authority they feared losing. I answered them with truth they resisted hearing. Truth does not argue to win. It stands. I told you stories again, about tenants who forgot who owned the vineyard, about invitations refused, and grace extended beyond expectation. I wanted you to see how easily people mistake privilege for ownership. Everything given remains a gift. As days passed, You sensed something approaching. You did not yet know its shape, but you felt its weight. I did not withdraw. I remained present. Love does not abandon truth when it becomes costly. I taught you to watch, not with fear, but with discernment. Not everything impressive is lasting. Not everything quiet is insignificant. As night fell, we left the city together. You were still confused, still hopeful, still learning. I had gone ahead of you into the city not to claim power, but to show you how truth walks calmly, even when the ground ahead is uncertain. And you were still walking with me. As the days in the city unfolded, I could see your thoughts growing restless. You sensed that time was moving differently now. Questions formed quietly in your hearts about endings, about loss, about what would come after what you feared might soon pass away. So I spoke to you about watchfulness. I did not speak to satisfy curiosity. I spoke to steady faith. There are things you are not meant to calculate, and there are things you are meant to live prepared for. You wanted to know when. I taught you how. I told you that the world shifts and trembles. Nations rise and fall. Power rearranges itself again and again. These things alarm those who trust in permanence that does not last. But you were not called to panic. You were called to remain rooted. I warned you not to be misled by voices that promise certainty. Many speak confidently about what they do not understand. Noise often imitates authority. Do not follow urgency that replaces faith with fear. Truth does not rush you into despair. I spoke of suffering, not to frighten you, but to prepare you. Difficulty does not signal abandonment. It reveals what your hope is built upon. Endurance grows when trust is deep. I told you that love would grow cold in many hearts, not because truth failed, but because fear narrows compassion. Hold fast to love. Those who endure in love remain aligned with the kingdom. I used images you would remember. A homeowner watching through the night. A servant remaining faithful while the master is away. Preparation is not anxiety. It is attention shaped by trust. I spoke of suddenness, of moments arriving without warning. Not to paralyze you, but to free you from delay. Do not postpone faithfulness. Live awake now. I told you that readiness is not about predicting events. It is about living with integrity. What you do in secret matters. How you treat others matters. What you invest your heart in matters. I spoke of servants given responsibility. Some remained faithful. Others abused time and trust. Delay revealed character. Waiting exposes what you truly believe. I told you that the kingdom does not reward noise, but faithfulness. Not speed, but sincerity. Those who remain attentive in ordinary moments are ready when extraordinary moments arrive. You listened quietly. Fear did not leave entirely, but it no longer ruled. You are learning that watchfulness is not tension. It is presence. I did not tell you these things to burden you. I told you so you would live awake, loving well, trusting deeply, and remaining faithful no matter how the world shifts around you. This is how you wait. As we remained together, I wanted you to understand something essential. The kingdom is not revealed only in moments of great decision. It is revealed in the ordinary choices you make, when no one is applauding, when no one is watching closely, when faithfulness feels quiet and unseen. So I spoke to you about readiness again, but this time through what looks small. I told you about servants entrusted with what belonged to their master. Each was given responsibility, not the same amount, but the same trust. What mattered was not how much they received, but how they responded to what was placed in their care. Some acted with courage. They worked with what they were given. They risked. They trusted the character of the one who entrusted them. Their faithfulness grew what was placed in their hands. One acted out of fear. He hid what he was given, not because he lacked ability, but because he did not trust. Fear disguised itself as caution, but fear always shrinks what it seeks to protect. I wanted you to see that trust is not passive. It moves, it acts, it risks, because it believes in goodness. What you do with what you have reveals what you believe about God. Then I spoke to you about judgment again, not as threat, but as clarity. I described a moment when truth is fully revealed, not through argument, but through recognition. I told you of people separated, not by knowledge, but by love lived or neglected. Some fed the hungry, some welcomed the stranger, some cared for the sick, some visited those forgotten. They did not know they were serving me. They were simply living compassion. Others passed by, not with cruelty, but with indifference. They did not intend harm. They simply did not see. And what they did not do revealed a distance they did not recognize. I wanted you to understand this deeply. The kingdom is not measured by grand claims of devotion. It is revealed in mercy practiced quietly. Love expressed toward the least is love expressed toward God. I did not tell you this to make you anxious. I told you so you would be attentive. Small acts shape the soul. Habitual compassion forms a heart ready for the kingdom. You do not wait for great moments to live faithfully. You live faithfully now, in what you choose, in whom you notice, in how you respond to need. I watched you listen carefully. Some of you were humbled, some were encouraged. That was right. The kingdom does not ask for spectacle. It asks for love. And love is most clearly seen in what you do when no one is keeping score. As the evening approached and the city grew quiet, I chose to sit with you, not to teach crowds, not to answer challenges, but to share a meal. You did not yet understand how much meaning rested in that moment, but I did. I had spoken many words to you along the way, yet some truths are not learned through speech alone. They are received through presence, through shared bread, through closeness that requires no explanation. As we gathered, you carried different thoughts in your hearts. Some of you were anxious, some were hopeful, some were confused. One carried secrets he had not yet spoken aloud. I knew all of it, and I did not turn away from the table. I took bread and gave thanks. This was familiar to you, but then I spoke differently. I gave the bread meaning that reached beyond the moment. I was not offering a symbol alone. I was offering myself. I told you that this sharing was not ending. It was becoming deeper. What you had known in my presence would continue in a new way. You would not lose what you had received. It would take root within you. I took the cup and spoke again, not of law written on stone, but of promise written on hearts. Life was being given, not taken. Love was choosing surrender. You listened quietly. Some of you did not understand. Some of you felt a heaviness you could not name. That was expected. Certain truths are felt before they are understood. I told you plainly that one of you would betray me. The words unsettled you. You searched your hearts. You asked questions softly. I did not accuse publicly. I named reality gently. Even then, I did not withdraw love. I did not close the table. I allowed choice to reveal itself. Love does not coerce loyalty. It offers itself fully and allows response. You argued quietly about greatness again. Even in this moment, old habits surfaced. I did not rebuke you harshly. I reminded you instead that my kingdom does not mirror the world. Those who lead here serve. Those who stand firm do so through humility. I told you that trials were coming. that fear would scatter you for a time, not because love would fail, but because you were still learning how deep it runs. I promised restoration before you even fell. I looked at you with affection. I knew your weakness. I also knew your future faithfulness. Failure would not define you. Love would. That night, the meal ended, but what was given there did not end. You walked with me afterward, not realizing that the table had already prepared you for what was coming, and even then, you were still mine. After the meal, we walked together into the night. The city behind us still murmured, but the place we went was quiet. I chose the garden not to hide, but to pray. There are moments when the heart must speak honestly before God, without an audience. You followed me there as you always had. Your bodies were tired. Your minds were full. You did not yet understand how heavy the hour had become. I asked you to stay near, not because I needed protection, but because love desires companionship, even when the path must be walked alone. I stepped away to pray. What I carried could not be shared fully. Some burdens must be spoken directly to God. I did not pretend strength that night. I did not hide anguish behind certainty. I spoke honestly. I asked if the path could pass another way. Not because I doubted purpose, but because obedience does not silence human longing. Faith does not erase pain. It chooses trust in the presence of it. Yet even as I asked, I surrendered. Not my will, but God's. Love does not cling to alternatives when truth has been revealed. When I returned to you, sleep had taken you. Not because you did not care, but because weariness often overtakes good intention. I did not shame you. I understood. The spirit may be willing, but the body is fragile. I prayed again. And again, I returned to find you resting. You were not prepared in the way you wished you were, but you were still mine. Then the night changed. Footsteps approached. Voices broke the silence. The moment you feared arrived sooner than expected. Betrayal does not always announce itself loudly. Sometimes it comes close and speaks softly. You were ready to defend with force. Fear moved quickly. I stopped you. This was not the way. The kingdom does not advance through violence. Love does not preserve itself by harming others. I allowed what was happening to unfold. Not because I lacked power, but because I chose surrender. There are moments when resistance would delay healing rather than bring it. You scattered, just as I said you would. Not because you were faithless, but because fear overwhelms before understanding matures. I did not chase you. I did not condemn you. I remained. The garden taught you something later, when you looked back. Strength is not always loud. Courage is not always aggressive. Obedience sometimes looks like stillness in the face of injustice. That night, love chose the harder path. And though you could not yet see it, that choice was for you. When they led me away, the night felt colder than before. Voices surrounded me, not seeking truth, but confirmation of what they had already decided. Questions were asked, not to understand, but to justify what fear demanded. I stood among them quietly, not because I had nothing to say, but because words would not soften hearts already closed to listening. There are moments when silence speaks more clearly than defense. False testimony rose and fell. Stories contradicted one another. Accusations leaned on exaggeration and rumor. You would have wanted me to correct them all. You would have wanted clarity to cut through confusion. But clarity offered to those unwilling to receive it becomes noise. They asked about my identity. They wanted me to deny truth or exaggerate it into something threatening. So I spoke simply. Truth does not need decoration. It stands on its own. My silence unsettled them. Those who depend on control are disturbed by calm they cannot provoke. Power expects resistance. Peace exposes insecurity. You were not there to see all of it. Some of you followed from a distance. Fear kept your steps cautious. Love kept you nearby. I knew both were present. I was struck, mocked, spoken over. None of this surprised me. When truth confronts fear, fear often lashes out. I did not answer insult with insult. I did not return violence for violence. This was not weakness. This was faithfulness. Love does not mirror cruelty to prove strength. You would later remember this silence, not as passivity, but as resolve. There are times when defending yourself feeds the very injustice you hope to undo. There are times when entrusting yourself to God is the truest act of strength. As the night wore on, you would falter too. Fear would press words from your mouth you wished you had never spoken. I knew that would happen. And still, my love for you did not change. The path was narrowing now. Choices were being finalized. Yet even here, nothing moved beyond what love allowed. I remained silent, so that truth could speak louder than accusation ever could. And even in that silence, I was still holding you in mind. Morning came, though it did not feel like light. The air was filled with urgency, with decisions already made. I was moved from place to place, questions repeated, authority displayed without understanding. You would later wonder why I did not resist more strongly. I want you to understand this. Power that proves itself through force is already afraid. Truth does not need to rush. It does not need to shout. It stands, even when pressed. They brought accusations again. They named fears as crimes. They asked questions not to hear answers, but to protect themselves from what truth required of them. I spoke when it mattered. I remained quiet when words would only deepen harm. You would think that innocence should demand defense. But there are moments when love chooses endurance, so that violence does not multiply. Resistance would not have healed hearts. It would have hardened them further. I was handed over, not because justice failed by accident, but because fear ruled the moment. You will see this again in the world. Fear still chooses control over compassion. Fear still prefers certainty over mercy. I carried what was placed upon me, not because I had no strength, but because strength was being used differently. I carried weight so that you would not have to carry it forever. Along the way, faces watched, some with curiosity, some with satisfaction, some with sorrow they did not know how to name. I saw all of it. I did not turn away. There were moments when kindness broke through the cruelty. Small gestures, brief compassion. Even in the hardest places, goodness still finds a way to surface. Do not forget this. Light does not vanish, even when darkness seems to dominate. You were scattered then, some hiding, some watching from a distance, some overwhelmed by guilt and confusion. I did not count your absence as betrayal. I understood your fear. Love accounts for weakness. Each step forward felt heavier to you than it did to me. Not because the pain was less, but because purpose steadied my heart. I knew what this path would open. I knew who it was for. I did not resist because this was not defeat. It was offering. Love given freely cannot be taken by force. One day you would understand that this willingness to endure was not surrender to injustice, but a refusal to let injustice define the final word. I carried the weight so that you could learn what love looks like when it chooses faithfulness over fear. As the path came to its end, you would later struggle to understand how I still spoke of mercy. Pain has a way of narrowing vision. Suffering often demands silence or anger. Yet even here, love did not retreat. There were voices around me. Some mocked, some misunderstood. Some spoke out of fear, others out of habit. The noise of cruelty often masks uncertainty. I did not answer it with bitterness. Bitterness multiplies what it touches. I spoke words of forgiveness, not because harm was small, but because hatred does not heal what it wounds. Forgiveness does not deny injustice. It refuses to let injustice have the final word. You would one day struggle with this. You would ask how mercy could exist alongside pain. Mercy is not agreement with wrong. It is freedom from being shaped by it. I noticed those near me. Some were desperate. Some were indifferent. Some were broken enough to hope even then. Hope often survives in the smallest places. One spoke to me with honesty. Not excuses, not defenses, just recognition. I answered with assurance. Life does not wait for perfect timing. Grace meets you where truth is spoken. I entrusted care for those I loved to one another. Even in suffering, love arranges protection. Love does not turn inward completely. It remains attentive. Darkness settled for a time. Not because light was defeated, but because the world was witnessing something deeper. Creation itself held its breath. What was unfolding was not loss. It was transition. I spoke again. Not many words, just enough. Trust does not require explanation in every moment. Sometimes it simply releases. When I breathed my last, it was not taken from me. It was given. Life offered willingly is never wasted. You would think this was the end. Many did. Grief would settle heavily on you. Hope would feel distant. Questions would have no answers yet. But understand this clearly. Love did not fail here. Love completed what it came to do. The silence that followed was not abandonment. It was waiting. And waiting was about to give way to something new. After the breath left my body, there was a stillness you did not expect. The noise ended abruptly. The cruelty ceased. The questions paused. What remained was quiet. You believed the silence meant absence. You believed nothing more could happen there. But silence is not emptiness. It is often the space where God works unseen. My body was laid where others had rested before. Stone closed the entrance. Guards stood watch. Precautions were taken to ensure finality. Fear always tries to seal what it does not understand. You went away heavy with grief. Some of you hid. Some of you wept openly. Some replayed every moment, wondering where hope had gone. You did not yet know that hope was still at work. I rested, not because life had ended, but because the work given was complete. Rest does not always follow victory, as the world imagines it. Sometimes it follows obedience fulfilled. You must understand this. What looks like stillness is not always defeat. Seeds are buried before they rise. Foundations are laid before walls appear. What is hidden is often being prepared. The tomb was not a prison. It was a threshold. What entered it did not remain unchanged. Death does not have the power to hold what love offers freely. Time passed differently for you than it did for me. For you, each hour felt endless. For me, nothing was lost. God does not measure time by fear. He measures it by purpose. You wondered if you had misunderstood everything. You wondered if trust had been misplaced. You wondered if the kingdom had slipped away quietly. These questions did not offend me. They revealed your humanity. The silence held your sorrow gently. It did not rush you. Grief needs space before understanding can return. Love does not demand immediate clarity. Even then, nothing had gone wrong. No promise had failed. No word had fallen empty. What was unfolding was larger than your fear, deeper than your grief, and stronger than death itself. The tomb was not the end of the story. It was the pause before revelation, the stillness before movement, the quiet before dawn. And though you could not yet see it, life was already stirring. When the morning came, it arrived quietly, not with announcement, not with spectacle, but with light returning the way it always does, patiently, faithfully. You came while the world was still unsure of itself. Grief moved your steps more than hope. You were not expecting surprise. You were coming to tend what you believed was finished. Love often moves even when hope feels gone. You looked for what you had lost. Instead, you found absence where certainty had been placed. The stone was moved. The space was open. Fear rose before understanding did. Your first thought was not resurrection, it was confusion. You ran, you searched, you questioned. Even when truth stands before you, the heart sometimes needs time to catch up. Loss trains the mind to expect disappointment. I spoke your name. That was all it took. Truth does not always need explanation. Sometimes it needs recognition. Love is known by how it addresses you personally. You turned. And in that turning, grief loosened its grip. Not instantly, but decisively. What you thought had been taken was standing before you. I did not rush you. I did not overwhelm you. I spoke gently, because tenderness restores what fear fractures. Joy does not always arrive shouting. Sometimes it whispers. I told you to go and speak, not to argue, not to persuade, just to tell what you had seen. Witness carries its own authority. Truth does not require force. You went, heart racing, voice trembling, words imperfect. Some did not believe you. Some doubted. Some hoped quietly. Hope often begins as hesitation. When I came to you again, fear still lingered. Doors were closed. Trust was fragile. I did not scold you for caution. I stood among you and spoke peace. Peace did not mean everything made sense. It meant you were not alone in making sense of it. Presence steadies what explanation cannot. I showed you my hands, not as proof alone, but as continuity. Love that gives itself does not erase its story. It redeems it. Some of you needed to touch truth to trust it. I allowed that. Faith grows differently in different hearts. Doubt does not disqualify you. It invites honesty. I breathed peace into you, not fear, not urgency, peace. What you were about to carry required calm courage. The morning did not erase the past. It transformed it. Loss did not disappear. It was reinterpreted. Death did not win. It was surpassed. That morning, the kingdom stood before you not as idea, but as life renewed. And everything began again. After the morning had unsettled your grief, after hope had begun to return slowly and unevenly, some of you walked away from the city. Not in rebellion, but in exhaustion. Your hearts were full of events you could not yet organize. So you walked, thinking aloud, trying to make sense of what had happened. I came alongside you on that road. Not suddenly, not dramatically, simply present. You did not recognize me. Grief often clouds perception. Expectation can blind as much as disbelief. I listened as you spoke. You recounted the story carefully. You named hope. You named disappointment. You named confusion. You spoke honestly, and I let you finish. Love listens before it explains. You wondered aloud how everything could end the way it had. You had hoped for redemption. You had hoped for restoration. You had hoped for clarity. And now you were unsure what to hope for at all. I began to speak to you then. Not with rebuke, but with patience. I showed you how the story you were living had always been moving toward life through suffering. How loss was not interruption, but part of the way healing entered the world. I reminded you of what had been written long before you walked that road. Not as distant history, but as living promise. Truth does not rush recognition. It unfolds gently when hearts are ready. As we walked, your hearts began to change before your minds did. Understanding often begins as warmth. Something stirred within you. Hope returned quietly, not yet named, but felt. When evening came, you invited me to stay. Hospitality opens doors, understanding cannot. You did not know who I was, yet you welcomed me. Love often practices truth before it recognizes it. When we sat together, when bread was broken, recognition came suddenly. Not because I changed, but because you did. Your eyes opened, understanding arrived. And then I was gone from your sight. Not to leave you, but to teach you something important. You would not always recognize me by appearance. You would recognize me by presence, by truth spoken, by hearts awakened. You rose immediately and returned to tell the others. Fear no longer slowed your steps. Joy carried you faster than weariness ever could. You learned that I walk with you even when you do not realize it. In conversation, in confusion, in quiet reflection. The kingdom does not abandon you when understanding lags behind faith. It walks patiently with you until recognition comes. And it always does. When you gathered again, your voices overlapped with relief and uncertainty. Stories moved quickly from mouth to mouth. Some spoke of seeing me. Some spoke of hearing news they could hardly accept. Hope was rising, but it had not yet settled. I came and stood among you. Not after knocking, not after announcement, simply present. Fear had closed the doors, but fear does not close what love opens. You were startled. Peace was the first thing you needed. So peace was what I gave. Not as reassurance that nothing hard would ever happen again, but as steadiness that nothing would separate you from me. I knew you needed more than words. So I showed you my hands, not to shock you, but to ground you. Continuity matters. Love that has suffered does not erase its marks. It transforms them into testimony. Some of you were filled with joy. Others were still unsure how to trust what stood before you. I did not rush either response. Faith grows at different speeds in different hearts. Truth is patient. I reminded you again that everything you had witnessed was not random. Nothing had gone wrong. What you had lived through had always been part of the way life would enter fully into the world. Understanding does not come all at once. It unfolds as the heart is ready to receive it. I opened your minds gently, not by force, but by connection. You saw how everything you had known was now being fulfilled in ways you could not have imagined before. What once confused you was beginning to align. I breathed peace into you, not symbolically, personally. Life given is meant to be shared. What you receive in stillness is meant to move outward in love. I told you that you were being sent, not alone, not unprepared, but accompanied. You were not to speak fear. You were not to spread confusion. You were to carry what you had experienced. Forgiveness, renewal, hope. Some of you still hesitated. You wanted certainty that could not be shaken. I did not shame you for this. I understood your desire. Trust built through experience does not disappear overnight. I invited honesty. Faith does not grow where questions are forbidden. It deepens where truth is spoken without disguise. You were no longer simply followers. You were witnesses, not because you had perfect understanding, but because you had encountered life where you expected finality. As I stood among you, you began to understand something essential. Peace is not the absence of fear. It is presence that steadies fear. And that presence was not leaving you. You were eager now. Hope had returned, and with it a desire to act quickly. You wanted to speak. You wanted to move. You wanted to make sense of everything by doing something with it. I understood that impulse. Joy often seeks motion, but I told you to wait. Not because the work was unclear, and not because you were unimportant. Waiting was not delay. It was preparation. There are things that cannot be carried by enthusiasm alone. They require depth. I reminded you that you already knew the story. You had walked it. You had lived it. But knowing what happened and being ready to carry its meaning are not the same thing. Understanding needs time to settle into courage. I spoke to you again about what had been promised. Not something you would manufacture. Not something you would control. Something you would receive. Power would come, but not the kind that dominates. Strength would arrive, but not the kind that shouts. You were to wait together, not alone. Faith matures in community. Isolation magnifies fear. Togetherness steadies it. In the days that followed, you remembered my words differently. Moments you had overlooked began to speak more clearly. Truth does this. It returns with greater meaning when the heart is ready. Waiting revealed what still needed healing. Some of you wrestled with guilt, some with doubt, some with questions you had been afraid to voice. I did not withdraw during this time. I remained near, even when you could not yet feel it. You were learning that readiness is not urgency, it is alignment. It is knowing not only what to say, but how to live. What you would carry into the world had to pass through your own hearts first. You prayed, not perfectly, but honestly. You spoke to one another. You remembered together. Memory, when shared, becomes strength. I waited with you because love does not rush what must be rooted. What grows too fast often lacks resilience. What is given time endures. Soon, you would be sent. Soon, your voices would carry far beyond the places you knew. But first, you needed to learn that waiting with trust is not wasted time. It is where courage is formed. As the time drew near for you to step forward, I wanted you to understand something that would steady you for years to come. I was not preparing to leave you in the way you feared. What was changing was not closeness, but form. You had learned to recognize me by voice, by steps on the road, by shared meals and quiet moments. You wondered how you would continue without seeing me as you once had. So I spoke to you about presence. I told you that presence is not limited by sight. Love is not contained by location. What has been shared deeply is not undone by change. You would not lose me. You would learn to recognize me differently. I reminded you again that the work ahead was not yours alone. You were not being sent to figure everything out. You were being sent accompanied, guided, strengthened. What you needed would be given when you needed it. I told you that peace would remain with you, not as memory, but as reality, not as something you look back on, but as something you live within. Fear would still come. Questions would still rise. But peace would be available even then. I spoke to you about teaching others, not with authority borrowed from position, but with humility shaped by experience. You would not speak as those who knew everything. You would speak as those who had been met by grace. I reminded you that obedience would not always feel clear. There would be moments of uncertainty, but love lived sincerely would always guide you toward truth. Perfection was not required. Faithfulness was. I told you to remember what you had seen, not just events, but character, not just miracles, but mercy. What you had received was meant to be reflected. You listened carefully. This time, You did not ask many questions. Some things no longer needed explanation. They had become part of you. I wanted you to understand this above all. Presence does not end when sight changes. Connection does not fade when form shifts. What binds us is not fragile. As you stood ready to move forward, you were no longer afraid of being left behind. You were learning that love does not withdraw. It expands. And I was not going away from you. I was going ahead of you, making room for what would come next. When the time came, there was no rush. No urgency pressed the moment forward. What was about to happen did not require speed. It required trust. You stood with me, still learning how to hold joy and uncertainty together. You had walked far since the days when you first followed, yet you felt again like beginners. That was not failure. That was humility. I lifted my hands toward you. This was familiar. You had seen blessings given before. But this one carried something deeper. It was not closing a chapter. It was opening one. I did not list instructions. I did not rehearse everything you needed to remember. Love does not overwhelm at the threshold. It steadies. As I blessed you, I was not withdrawing care. I was entrusting you with it. Blessing is not separation. It is extension. What has been shared is now meant to move outward through you. You watched as I was taken from your sight. Not suddenly, not violently, peacefully. You did not feel abandoned. You felt full. That surprised you. Joy rose where grief once lived. Not because everything was clear, but because trust had taken root. You understood something important then. Presence was not gone. It had changed shape. You returned together, not scattered, not afraid. United. You carried joy not as excitement alone, but as quiet confidence. Something had been entrusted to you, and you were ready to hold it. You gathered again, waiting as I had told you to wait. But waiting no longer felt like uncertainty. It felt like expectancy. Hope had learned patience. The blessing stayed with you. Not as words remembered only, but as strength lived out. When doubt came later, you would remember how peace had felt in that moment. How love had not let go. You were not left looking upward forever. Your eyes returned to the world before you. The kingdom was no longer something you followed at a distance. It was something you carried. And though you could no longer see me as before, you were beginning to understand that you had never been closer. You returned to the city together, not because you were instructed to hide, but because you were learning how to remain. Waiting no longer felt empty. It felt purposeful. Expectation had replaced confusion. You gathered often. You prayed. You remembered. You spoke my words to one another, not as repetition, but as nourishment. Memory was becoming strength. Some of you revisited moments you had misunderstood before. Words spoken on hillsides, stories told beside water, silences that once puzzled you. Now they returned with clarity. Truth has a way of ripening with time. You waited together because isolation weakens courage. Alone, fear grows loud. Together, faith steadies itself. You were learning that the kingdom has always moved through shared life, not solitary certainty. There were moments of doubt. Waiting always tests trust. You wondered when the promise would come. You wondered what it would feel like. You wondered if you would recognize it. I did not rush you through these questions. Questions asked honestly deepen faith. Then the waiting ended. Not gradually, not quietly. Suddenly. What arrived did not overwhelm you. It filled you. Fear did not vanish instantly, but courage rose where fear had lived. Understanding did not arrive as explanation. It arrived as assurance. You found yourselves speaking with clarity. You did not rehearse. Strength moved through your words. Not forceful, true, not persuasive by argument. Alive. You understood then why I had asked you to wait. What had come could not have been produced by effort. It could only be received. The presence I promised was not symbolic. It was real, near, active. You were not suddenly different people. You were yourselves, freed from fear that once restrained you. The waiting had done its work. Roots had formed. What grew now would endure. The kingdom did not arrive as noise. It arrived as life moving through you. And you were ready. When you stepped beyond the place where you had been waiting, you did not feel suddenly powerful. You felt present, grounded, aware. That mattered more than confidence. You went out as you were, not perfected, not polished, not certain of every word you would speak. I did not delay you until fear was gone. Fear rarely disappears before obedience. It quiets as you move. You spoke in languages you had not practiced, not to impress, but to connect. Love finds the voice people can hear. The kingdom does not insist on uniformity. It honors understanding. Some listened and leaned in. Some questioned. Some resisted. Response varied, but truth remained steady. You were not sent to control outcomes. You were sent to witness. You told the story simply. What you had seen, what you had heard, what had changed you. Witness does not require argument. It requires honesty. You spoke of repentance, not as shame, but as turning. Turning toward life. Turning toward hope. Turning toward grace already offered. Change invited is not condemnation. It is mercy. You spoke of forgiveness, not as theory, but as something you had received when you did not deserve it. Your voices carried authenticity. People recognized that. You spoke of new life, not as escape from the world, but as renewal within it. Life did not become easier overnight, but it became lighter, meaning reshaped burden. Some were moved deeply, some were confused, some mocked. You remembered my words. Rejection does not negate truth. Acceptance does not define it. You stayed together. You shared what you had. You broke bread. You prayed. Community formed naturally. The kingdom grows where generosity replaces fear. You learned quickly that this work would cost you. Misunderstanding, opposition, loss of comfort. But you also discovered joy that did not depend on ease. Joy rooted in purpose remained steady. I watched as you learned to listen, to discern when to speak, to rest when weary, to forgive again and again. You were becoming what you carried. You were not sent out because you were finished. You were sent out because love moves outward. Life shared multiplies. Grace given returns, transformed. This was not the end of learning. It was the beginning of living fully awake. And I was still with you, not behind, not distant, but present in every step you took. As time passed, the first warmth of joy met the steady weight of endurance. The road did not smooth itself simply because you walked it faithfully. Resistance came. Misunderstanding followed. Some welcomed you with open hearts. Others closed doors quickly. I had prepared you for this, but preparation does not remove feeling. You discovered that faithfulness is not proven once. It is proven again and again in ordinary days. Courage learned in one moment must be chosen again in the next. I taught you not to be surprised when hardship arrived, not because suffering is good, but because difficulty does not mean you are off the path. Often it confirms that you are walking it. You learned to return to what grounds you. Shared meals, shared prayers, shared silence. Roots grow deep when life presses hard from above. I reminded you through memory and spirit, that endurance is not stubbornness. It is hope held patiently. It is trust that refuses to abandon love when results are slow or unseen. Some of you were imprisoned, some were scattered, some lost what once felt secure. Yet the kingdom did not shrink. It spread quietly through faith lived honestly. You learned to encourage one another, not with false optimism, but with shared truth. Truth spoken between companions lightens burden. You learned when to speak boldly and when to remain quiet. Wisdom does not rush every moment. Discernment grows with humility. You remembered how I walked toward Jerusalem without retreat, not driven by fear, but anchored in love. That memory steadied you when your own steps trembled. I taught you that remaining rooted does not mean standing still. It means drawing strength from what is unchanging while everything else shifts. The kingdom does not promise ease. It promises presence. And presence is enough to carry you through seasons you did not choose. So you kept walking. Not because it was simple, but because love had already proven faithful to you. And you trusted that it would remain so. There were nights when silence returned. Not the peaceful silence of rest, but the heavy quiet that follows loss. You remembered those nights from before. Fear tried to speak again. I reminded you then that you were never meant to carry this alone. Faith is not sustained by individual strength. It is sustained by shared life. You learned to recognize my presence, not only in prayer, but in one another. A word spoken at the right time. A meal shared when resources were thin. A hand extended without explanation. Presence often arrives through people willing to love faithfully. This is not coincidence. It is design. When one of you weakened, another stood firm. When doubt crept into one heart, hope answered through another voice. Community became sanctuary. You remembered that I did not choose you because you were strong. I chose you because you were willing. Willingness creates space for grace to work. You began to see that loneliness is not absence of people, but absence of connection. And connection grows where vulnerability is welcomed. You learned to speak honestly, to admit fear, to share questions without shame. I reminded you again and again that nothing could separate you from love. Not distance, not opposition, not uncertainty. What holds you is stronger than what threatens you. Even when you felt unseen, you were known. Even when you felt unheard, your prayers were received. Even when you felt weak, strength was moving quietly through you. You learned that presence does not always feel dramatic. Sometimes it feels like endurance. Sometimes it feels like quiet resolve. Sometimes it feels like simply standing again after falling. But you were never abandoned. Not in movement, not in stillness, not in joy, not in sorrow. The kingdom does not leave its people to find their way alone. It walks with them, always. As the kingdom continued to grow among you, I taught you again what trust looks like in daily life. Trust is not only spoken, it is practiced. You learned to hold what you had lightly: time, possessions, plans, even certainty. Clenched hands cannot receive new life. You shared what you had, not because you were forced, but because generosity had reshaped your hearts. What you released returned in forms you did not expect. Peace, belonging, freedom. You discovered that giving does not diminish life. It enlarges it. Fear says protect. Love says share. The kingdom moves where love leads. You learned that forgiveness is also an open-handed act. Holding resentment weighs the soul. Releasing it restores movement. Forgiveness does not rewrite history. It redeems the present. Some wrongs were deep. Some wounds slow to heal. I did not rush you. Healing does not obey command. It unfolds as trust returns. You practiced generosity, even when misunderstood, even when taken advantage of. Wisdom grew alongside compassion. You learned boundaries without bitterness. Love does not require blindness. I taught you to trust provision without demanding excess. Enough is abundance when peace is present. You learned to live thankful. Gratitude reshapes vision. It trains the heart to see what remains steady, even when circumstances change. Open hands changed how you lived. You were no longer driven by accumulation. You were guided by purpose. The kingdom became visible, not in what you claimed, but in how you lived, in what you released, in how you loved. And your lives began to speak, even when your voices were quiet. Now you understand what you once only followed. The kingdom was never meant to end with me walking beside you. It was meant to continue through you, not through power as the world defines it, not through dominance or fear, but through lives shaped by love, truth lived honestly, and mercy practiced daily. You are the continuation of what you received, not replacement, not imitation. Continuation. Where you go, the kingdom goes. Where you love, the kingdom is seen. Where you forgive, the kingdom breathes. You will not always feel strong. You will not always feel certain. That does not disqualify you. Faithfulness does not depend on feeling. It depends on trust, practiced again and again. Remember what you have learned. That life grows quietly. That love endures patiently. That hope remains even when unseen. The kingdom does not advance by force. It advances by presence, by people willing to live awake, with open hearts and steady courage. You were never meant to carry everything, only to carry love forward, only to remain faithful to what has already been planted within you. And as long as you walk this way, with humility, with mercy, with trust, the kingdom continues. Through you.